So let's go to the first slogan, the suggestion that God is giving us a test. But if you think about this, it's not clear how far it's going to take us, because after all, the GCB is by definition omniscient. So why would just as you would not expect an omniscient teacher to give her class any examinations, because she already knows exactly, by virtue of her omniscience, what her students know, so too, you would not expect an omniscient being like a GCB to have to give any people tests, because the GCB already knows what they're going to do. So it's not clear that this form of a response to the problem of evil is going to take us very far. What about the idea that evil is just a privation? One sometimes hears this, and if we think of a privation as somehow the absence of something actual, like for example, the way in which a shadow is a privation, one might say, well, sure, one could reply to this reply by saying, well, sure, maybe evil is a privation because it's the absence of good, for example, but that does not get the theist off the hook, as it were, because even if evil is a privation in this sense, we can still ask why the GCB would have allowed so many, so to speak, shadows in the world. Why would the GCB have allowed this world to be such a dark place? If darkness is a metaphor for evil, we might say this world, if it were created by a loving, omnipotent, omniscient God, for example, would be one in which things were much more bright, for example. So it's not clear that the idea that evil is a privation is going to take us very far either as a way of responding to the problem of evil. What about the idea that one sometimes hears things balance out? And this is a natural way of interpreting what Leibniz had in mind, that somehow evil over in this corner of the universe is somehow balanced out by a great deal of good in some other corner of the universe. Well, this might be along the right track, but it still needs some refinement, because think about the following example. Suppose that there's a wife abuser, a man who abuses his wife by being physically abusive to her and maybe verbally abusive to her as well throughout the week, but on Sunday he always brings her roses. Now we might say, well, look, that's very nice of him to bring her a bouquet of roses every Sunday, appreciate that, but that doesn't make what he does for the rest of the week okay. It doesn't justify his behavior for the rest of the week. One feels he should be nice to her, respectful, loving, and so forth all week long. Wouldn't that be appropriate? And I'll bet she'd still appreciate the roses on Sunday. So it's not clear that the idea that things balance out in some straightforward sense of the notion of balancing is going to solve the problem of evil, because one wants to ask, why does there need to be any balancing at all? Because one could imagine an even better husband who doesn't engage in any abusive behavior and who would be just as loving and be just as much appreciated, hopefully more appreciated, by his spouse as a result. Well, this brings us to the fourth kind of response, which might, I think, have more to it. That is the slogan, no mountains without valleys. This, I want to suggest, is the most plausible of the replies that we might construe Leibniz's remark as implicitly suggesting. That is, perhaps there are some moral virtues that can only be realized in a world that contains either moral or physical evil. Consider examples such as forgiveness. It seems like if I'm in the business of trying to create a world, create a universe, I want there to be free agents, and part of what I find valuable in that world, what I find beautiful in that world, making that world a worthwhile place, is that it contains agents who are capable of, and who sometimes engage in acts of forgiveness. But you can't have forgiveness unless something has been done wrong. That is to say, I can't forgive you for being nice to me, but I can forgive you for being vicious to me, or being negligent towards me or someone else. That is to say, the concept of forgiveness presupposes that there has been some error or evil somewhere committed by someone. Or take another example, compassion. I can't feel compassionate towards you if your life is going wonderfully. I can only feel compassionate towards you if something has happened that has caused you to suffer in some way. So again, compassion is something that I think you can see adds value to a universe, as it were, but that nevertheless presupposes that there be that's a mountain, but there be some valley as well. That is, somebody having a bad time of it. Or mercy. I can't exercise the virtue of mercy unless someone has been, again, suffering or done wrong or been in a tough spot. Otherwise, there's no possibility of my being merciful. Perseverance. How can I persevere if everything that happens to me is easy. One can only be speaking ironically if somebody says to me, look, I hope you can persevere all the way through that piece of apple pie. Unless I'm in a pie eating contest or something and I'm about to stuff myself to the point of pain, persevering is not something I need to do when I'm eating a slice of apple pie. It's just something that I do because it's so easy, because one hopes it tastes very good. Perseverance is something that we need in order to do things that are difficult. But that difficulty suggests that there was some, at least physical evil around that we had to confront. Another example, courage. One can't be courageous unless one's confronted with something that is challenging, or at least the possibility of physical or moral evil is on the horizon. Or fortitude. Again, fortitude doesn't exist in a world in which everything is incredibly easy. Fortitude is only possible in a world in which there are some challenges. So you might say these mountains, forgiveness, compassion, mercy, perseverance, courage, fortitude, are only possible in a world that has some valleys, some suffering, or at least the near possibility of suffering, pain, discomfort, etc., that make these things possible. Otherwise, these concepts, these attributes don't seem to make any sense. So it is that here's an example in which we might say the theist has something that she can say in response to the problem of evil. She might say with some plausibility, there are some moral virtues that are really valuable. They constitute the mountains, so to speak. But they can only exist in a world in which you've got some valleys as well. And so Leibniz was onto something, the theist might say, that there are some moral virtues that make a universe a valuable place, but that are only possible in a world in which there's some evil as well.